Welcome. I'm Kinetic Symphony. I hunt down and report on mysterious and weird true stories, from glitches to the paranormal. Case file number 375, written by relativelyfunkadelic, a mystery in the Big Bend National Park. I've been searching for some semblance of similarity in someone else's encounter for 3 years now, hoping another's experience might align even a little bit with my own to validate it. Until last night, I'd found details aligning with my own encounter, but nothing I felt was concrete enough to make my story not sound absolutely batshine insane. It still does sound insane, I know, and have no way to further explain any of it, so all I have is what I witnessed. I found a post on here from 18 days ago that sounds eerily similar to my own. The key difference being the familiarity of the voices mimicked, leading me to wonder if this thing had been watching us for a while. To get both of our voices down, it would have to have heard us at the most recent, 10 hours earlier before we had left for work. I've been wanting to write this since it happened in 2018, 2019, but I legitimately get really uncomfortable the moment I start. I'm sure the thing isn't actually watching or whatever, but I don't know. I just hate retelling it, honestly. I think it's important to share, though, because finding someone else's story led me to finding several others that seemed to align with whatever I saw, and it was honestly so cathartic. I figured maybe somebody else might be in the same boat and needs some sort of validation that they aren't insane. I was living down in West Texas in this national park where the restaurant I was working at the time rested at the top of a 15-minute hike up a mountain trail from the housing they had us in. I closed up the restaurant after everyone left each night, so I was always an hour or two later coming down the hill than everyone else. Usually pretty empty, really quiet, uncommon to encounter anyone else, as the only thing at the top of the mountain is the closed restaurant, gift shop, store, and some of the trailheads. There isn't much reason for anyone else to be on the trail at that hour. And this one freaking night, I'm coming down, no moon, so it was pitch black, empty trail, characteristically quiet. I rounded this last bend to get to my house, and right before I got off the trail to take a shortcut through the thicket of cactus and brush, there were maybe 15 to 20 trees. Even though it's a desert, the top of the mountain has a high Sierra microclimate. When I hear my best friend / roommate call out my name, clear as day in the other direction. He said my name, and when I turned, said it again. In retrospect, it sounded funny. It was close, 15 yards away maybe, but it sounded far off at the same time. Like if someone recorded his voice from far away, but played it very nearby. It just sounded off, but not enough to flip a switch immediately. And maybe I'm painting the memory of it differently than it actually sounded. So I'm facing my house, maybe 50 yards away, and the voice comes from directly to my left, on this foothill of the mountain we'd like to hike around sometimes. It was much more tree coverage than the trail I was on, and considerably more than a thicket separating me from the clearing surrounding my house. If you walked 5 feet in the direction the voice came from, you'd completely disappear from the view of anyone on the trail or on the back porch of the house, immediately. Hearing my friend's voice calling me over, I was like, oh, cool, we're night hiking, and I turned to follow it. But right before I take my first step into the tree line, I hear his actual voice down on our porch saying, "Hey, who are you talking to?" Which stops me. I turned back to face my house, confused as hell, just in time to see this freaking thing burst out of the freaking thicket I was just about to shortcut through to begin with, before hearing the first voice and turning away. And from the exact spot I had walked down every single night, this freaking thing bolts. It was humanoid technically, but the thing is tall as hell and way too skinny for a human, like at least 8 feet tall but slim. It looked inhumanly slender. He was hunched over and running like he had just burst off a track mark, but kept that same form the whole time, never got all the way upright. Okay, so as for the color, that has always messed with me, because for one, I'm colorblind as hell, and it was like a greenish, yellowish thing, and I get greens and yellows mixed up a lot, at least for this hue of green and yellow. And for two, it looked like it was giving off its own glow, which has always sounded so absolutely ludicrous. I never tell anyone that I do not absolutely trust them to give me the benefit of the doubt before thinking that I'm completely making it up. Because if I heard this story, I would honestly think someone at the very least is exaggerating. Our back porch light was on though, and the thing lined up with where it could have been shining on it. So if this thing was translucent, it definitely could have taken on that sheen by reflecting the porch light. The colors do line up, I guess. If you'd reflected the light, it may have looked like this thing's color, but it certainly wasn't identical. Honestly though, I swear it had its own shine to it. Like looking at a glow stick that's dying. More than enough to see, but kinda faint. Regardless, it was a light that definitely wasn't there a second before, when I'd gotten to the shortcut. It would have stuck out for the last 50 yards of the walk at least. It should be noted, had I followed that thing's voice, two things would have happened. One, I would have completely disappeared from the view of anyone, and two, I would have turned my back on whatever that thing was and entered into the thicket of trees, weeds, and cactus, far too dense for me to turn around, run, fight back, anything. That trail I would have gone towards leads directly to the edge of a cliff that drops down into a massive break in the mountain. The window in Big Bend National Park that cleanly drops all of the 6,000 feet to the wide open desert below. That could be the purpose of that direction. To be honest, if I was going to try to do something nefarious, it would be the perfect place to both find someone and lead them quickly to a spot where no one else would come up on you. Legitimately, in the middle of the day, you could probably make someone disappear over there if you wanted to. Anyway, how this thing was running, it immediately felt like I had freaking spooked it. Like how a deer runs off at a noise, but this was different in that it seemed a lot more determined. It seemed intelligent, aware of its own movement, not just acting out of instinct. Kinda like spooking a person if they'd been watching you from the bushes or something, you know? Like it spooked but sentient. And definitely acting like I'd just foiled some nefarious plan. So naturally, I also freaking bolt, exposing my back to this thing, but taking the opposite, slightly longer way back to my porch. My freaking buddy, God bless his soul, is still there when I make it, and he asks again, "Who are you with?" His face is just confused as hell, and he keeps looking past me, and I'm like, "You heard it too, right?" And he says, "Yeah, where are they?" And I was like, What? There were multiple?" Apparently, from his perspective, he had heard multiple voices alongside my own, all carrying on and joking around, talking back and forth pretty loudly. He said there were at least 3 other voices talking to mine, but that it sounded like a whole crowd coming down the trail. He said he could clearly hear us getting closer and closer for the past few minutes, and just assumed I'd run into a hiking group and talked with them as we headed down. Not the most uncommon thing in the daytime, but pretty uncommon for the hour of night. It took me a minute to show him that I wasn't messing with him and had not just split off from a group of hikers. I was completely alone and had not vocalized a word until he came up to ask, "Who are you with?" It took a second to even express my side of what was going on. I was so out of whack I couldn't find the words to actually explain it, so I just kept shouting, "I swear to God, I just heard your voice, and then this freaking thing, dude, this thing," or something similar to that. Eventually, it registers that there were no other lights on the trail. I wasn't using a flashlight that night, so maybe there was actually some moon out, and I had just heard his voice calling me off trail and into the dark, and we both began trying to figure out what the hell we'd just witnessed. Okay, this part might be a little crazy, but I'm not implying anything, I'm just saying. This is what I'd been doing on the walk down before this happened. So obviously walking home solo, I hadn't actually said a word. Whoever he heard was certainly not me, and I certainly didn't come with a crowd, but I had been praying like crazy on the hike down. There had just been this super dark, negative energy in the house lately, and I was just trying to kinda surround myself with light and positivity, asking God to give me strength before I walked back in. And out of nowhere, midway through the trail, I got this absolutely overwhelming joy, like absolute ecstasy. I was screaming inside, happy as bones, and just felt like I could take on the whole freaking world. No matter what came, I could take it. Maybe I am implying something, because call me crazy, but I've always felt like that had something to do with how the night turned out, as opposed to how it maybe would have. I don't know. I know that part really does make me sound insane, but so does the rest of it, so whatever. I certainly don't think it was a coincidence. I'm just not sure what to make of it. Every detail means every detail. That's just what's going on with your boy as the walk was happening. It would have been a noteworthy and memorable night had the thing not done any of this. It was that powerful of an energy. That's pretty much it. The only other thing is memories of it. Out of nowhere, I just sort of stopped thinking of it. Not like I forgot, but like it was hidden behind a thick fog in my head. The next morning, I told the story to a friend, and she uncharacteristically shut me down and just said something like, "Y'all are just crazy and getting scared of these mountains," and just walked away. It really was not like her to just dismiss someone, especially a friend, without even hearing him out. She was a real empathetic lady. It was like she just heard something that triggered a memory she refused to touch, and shut it down before it got too close. I could be reading it, but that's happened a couple of times with this story. And anyway, we'd been living on that mountain on and off for a few years at that point, and had never once heard or seen anything remotely similar to that thing. Until that night, we'd never even heard a story even vaguely resembling that. It just wasn't like we got spooked by our own house or the trail we took twice a day, every day. And it wasn't like we were seeing and hearing things based on stories we'd projected into the darkness, you know? But the weirdest freaking thing happened the moment she walked away. It was like a freaking fog just slowly poured over the memory, and the last time I remember thinking of it was that moment, and then it just freaking disappeared for months. How in the world does something that massive, that frightening, happen in your life and you just stopped thinking about it, and then one day it just popped back up? I was honestly so surprised and unsure of how I hadn't thought of it in so long. It was almost more baffling than anything we actually witnessed. I asked my friend just before I sent this if he'd felt the same fog, and he said, absolutely. He doesn't really like talking about that night, honestly, and he's told me that I cannot help but bring it up as often as possible, hoping by talking it through we'd find some sort of explanation for any of what happened. Even as I typed the message though, I'd felt like I'd asked him a million times already and just forgotten his answer. Maybe I have. That isn't a super uncommon thing to do, I guess. Now that's pretty much everything. I really felt like I needed to convey as absolutely many details as I could possibly remember, just in case someone reading this has any sort of experience with any part of it. A mimic or a humanoid or memory loss, anything. I really don't know what to make of all of this. All I have are the details of that night and my memory of doing something bizarre afterward. I have never known what to make of it, but the other guy's posts from a few weeks back honestly helped me after 3 years of grappling with the experience. Just seeing something that might be similar seems like I've learned as much about it as I honestly feel comfortable knowing. I just figured maybe someone else might be in the same boat and maybe needs to see some sort of validation. Just validation, I guess. Thanks for listening.